record historic unemployment numbers, and as we mentioned, there are hiring signs in storefronts, so you would think that those people who really want a job could find it. Do you think it's that simple, that if you really want to work, there's opportunities for you too?
Well, there is an extent to which it is that simple, but there are, as I think is demonstrated both by what Ashley said and what Jason said at the outset here, there are so many different factors that play a role in the things that we're talking about tonight. Wage growth, the economy overall, that play a major role. The good news is exactly what you just said, that the national economy is booming, the state economy is in a really good spot. We have more Kentuckians working today than we ever have before. We had in April, we had the lowest unemployment rate in the history of Bureau of Labor Statistics data. So there's a lot of indicators that the economy is strong and that for those people who are looking for employment, that there are opportunities out there. That doesn't mean that doesn't negate the things that Jason said. There are certainly complications, there are certainly instances in which skills aren't matching up to openings, and there are a lot of factors that come into play. Ashley made reference to the concentration of job growth that's happened in the urban areas, which is one of the problems that we have in Kentucky. She mentioned the 180,000 jobs that have increased in Kentucky since the end of the recession. 50% of those are in two counties, Jefferson and Fayette. There are significant problems whenever you have a heavy concentration like that. A lot of the industries that rebounded more strongly after the recession were industries that required advanced degrees. About 50% of Kentuckians have some level of education after high school. The national average is around 60%. So you can see where some of this gap begins to take hold. And it's much more complicated than just rising executive pay or any of these other factors. There are a lot of things that play a role in this. But to your question, for many Kentuckians who are willing to work, who are willing to enter the labor market, they are finding employment in this economy.
We understand from a recent Pew Research Center study that the real average wage, the wage after accounting for inflation, has about the same purchasing power as it did 40 years ago. Do you disagree with that assessment and finding by the Pew Research Center? And what would be your rationale for why it's the same and why maybe that's not a bad thing?
Well, I mean, I certainly wouldn't disagree with the data that Pew puts forward. And this is another one of those things that, of course, a lot of factors play a role. When we talk about that in Kentucky, there are a lot of things that are significant. Kentucky's average household income is about $11,000 below national average. This is one of the things that lawmakers need to understand. And to your point and to your question, you'd be hard-pressed to find a state in the last 2 years that have done more to help itself to move in the right direction as it relates to fixing some of these problems that we've long had in Kentucky. But the work is absolutely not done. We've taken major steps, but the work is not done. Things like that are an indicator of that fact.
And what are those things that Kentucky has done that you're referencing that you can be specific about?
Yeah, well, we've improved our tax code. We've lowered the top marginal rate. We've made it more simple. We've done things like workers' comp reform. We've done things like become a right-to-work state. We've done a lot of things that made our business climate better. We've seen record investment in the state as a result from that. In this last session, we moved from 33rd in overall business competitiveness to 17th. And so there are a lot of things that are making Kentucky more attractive. Ashley mentioned being a state in the center of the country. We don't have mountains, we don't have oceans, we don't have some of the natural topography that attracts people. You have to do other things to make yourself competitive. Luckily, in the last 2 years, we've done a lot of those things on the state level. There's a lot more to be done, but we are moving in the right direction. And that's one of the things that Dr. Coombs's work shows, and there are many other indicators in the economy.
And we'll get to your ideas about what is left
on the work that they're doing. And we don't see that.
Yeah, it's interesting because there seems to be some golden age thinking on the other side of the table that probably ends somewhere around 2015, I would guess, is when the end of that golden age, I guess, was. But here's the reality. 1958, Kentucky was 44th in wages. 2015, Kentucky was 47th in the country in wages. Many decades of policy, obviously, in between there that didn't make much of a difference. Many decades of a broken tax code that didn't make much of a difference. Many decades of investment that didn't help to fix the problem. That's That's the reality. To the point that Ashley's made, to the point that Dr. Coombs makes in the piece that the Chamber released, the last few years we have started to see us turn in the right direction. The interesting thing about that 1958 number, Indiana and Tennessee were both in our rearview mirror in 1958. Today they have moved past us. They have about a 25-year head start on us, doing the same sort of policies and implementing the same sort of policies that we've seen the Kentucky State Legislature act on in the last 2 years. Now their economies are both stronger. Indiana and Tennessee both have stronger economies, and their wage growth is stronger. We're talking a lot about wage growth. Both of those states have wage growth above national average right now. Both of those states have wage growth.
And you credit that to the policies such as right to work and prevailing wage.
Absolutely. The tax code, all of those things. There are a lot of things. Both of those states have income taxes that are lower than ours. Both of those states have implemented policies over the course of multiple decades that attract businesses and that help businesses flourish, that help get people to work. That is absolutely what has been essential to both of those states, and it's the exact thing that our legislature has done over the past 2 years.
And so we expect the same results, or you expect
Most
the same
certainly,
results in the next 20 years?
We cannot believe that the metrics are all going to be evident in 2 years alone, to Ashley's earlier point. We are 2 years into a 10-year process to really reverse course of our economic ship.
So by 2027, we should see some results when the federal
Absolutely.
tax cuts on individuals expire.
But it's also interesting to hear people push back on the record number of investment, because that by itself is evidence of what is going on in the state of Kentucky. So that's an early indicator, but absolutely by 2027 there should be a lot of indicators in place that start to show the benefits of what's gone on in the past.
Will increase the workforce participation. Do you care to comment further?
Well, I've been quite open about the fact that I think that the work requirement is one of the most positive things that's happened over the course of the Bevin administration. I think it's one of the best things that we've done as a state. I think we're leading as a state on this question. I continue to be amazed by what I refer to as this golden age thinking when we talk about some of these numbers, some of these statistics, which have been unchanged for decades despite the policy recommendations and the policy procedures that were put in place to try to fix these ailments. And the fact is that they just didn't. And instead, over the course of the last 2 years, we've seen things point in a different direction. And that direction is basically this. You put more money in people's pockets, you help them drive the economy, you help ensure they drive the economy, and by that I mean you put more money in people's pockets by cutting their income taxes, by helping them determine the direction of the economy. You encourage people to get into the workforce. This is one of the biggest problems in our state. We are 44th in workforce participation. We are below 60% of able-bodied individuals currently working as of August 2018. It is critical for the future of this state that we encourage people to get to work, that we provide pathways to get people to work. It is essential for our future.
And in fact, in the Coombs
we can agree on. It's interesting as we talk about this. At the beginning of the summer, the Council of Economic Advisors released a report where they looked at the largest entitlement programs in the federal government and found that about 50% of individuals on all of those programs are able-bodied individuals. This is something I think the people of Kentucky probably understand pretty well, that if we're going to make that exchange with individuals, that you will get health care coverage or that you will get other benefits from the federal government, it is quite reasonable to expect in return that you have employment 20 hours a month, that you volunteer, that you provide a community service of some sorts.
20 hours a week.
20 hours a week.
80 hours a month.
I don't think that anyone in Kentucky, the working people of Kentucky, really view that as an unreasonable move on the part of the Bevin administration or on the part of the state.
I think the bottom line is
approximately 30%.
Something amazing happened just a minute ago. I agreed with about 80% of what Jason said in his comments about the corporate tax code and the fact that there have been too many giveaways, and there's no doubt that there are too many holes in our tax code that benefit corporations and that benefit others. I think that we can find agreement on that, but there's two different remedies to dealing with that situation. And unfortunately, Jason's remedy, which is where that other 20% comes in, cripples the economy. In the last session, what we started with tax reform, which is a starting point, that's important to understand, and it's kind of been framed in properly. But any individual in Kentucky who makes above $8,000 got a tax cut last year. They were paying about 5.8% on those wages above that amount. That's down to a flat 5%. We've brought the corporate rate down to a flat 5%. The key for us is to continue seeing those numbers go down so that our government has to rely on handouts less, that we have a business climate that is so competitive and so attractive that we don't have to cut these holes in our tax code. That's the way business has been done in the past. The hope is that we move more and more over the course of the next 10 years towards a tax code that's fair across the board. And that's what we need to see, not some of the proposals that Jason would provide as remedies to that problem.
That's factual.
Argue about this until we're blue in the face. It is in no way a tax cut that is designed for that purpose. It is a tax cut that is designed looking at Indiana, looking at Tennessee, and seeing the wage growth, seeing the economic growth going on in both of those places, and recognizing that after multiple decades of stagnation, after multiple decades of failed policy, we have to build a more competitive climate in Kentucky. And that's exactly what we did. We moved from 33rd to 17th. That's what's at the heart of last year's tax.
So I want to get to one thing that was in the report by KSEP. The state of work is a good first step, but there's another.
Yeah, we have to continue to get the rates lower, which is going to be an area of disagreement. But Jason made reference to the preschool thing. I'm in complete agreement on that point. We have to get our educational attainment in this state higher. That is absolutely part two. A tax code that works for businesses is the foundational level. A tax code that works for individuals is the foundational level. But it's clear when you look at the states that are growing at faster rates, when you look at states that have rapid wage growth, educational attainment is a critical aspect of that. And ours in Kentucky is way too low.
But if you cut education or the support services for K through 12 education, how do you get there?
Well, as we demonstrated in a report by Dr. Guerin and Dr. Stephen Gordon just a few months ago, which was talked about on this program, simply pumping money into the existing system has demonstrated that it is not an effective way to fix this problem. And so what we need is creative solutions and other policies that help ensure that we take the next step.